I would never betray you. Sandra's voice cracked as she yelled at the top of her voice. Her eyes were wet, her hands trembling, her whole body shaking under the weight of a truth nobody believed anymore. Joel stood in front of her, sword in hand, the blood moon hanging low and red in the sky above them. His jaw was tight. His chest was heavy with betrayal. Then why did they find you there? He asked. His voice was low. Joel, please. He drove the sword through her. The sound she made wasn't a scream. It was softer than that. A small broken exhale. Like the last breath of someone who had already accepted the end. Sandra's knees buckled. Her fingers reached up and wrapped around his wrist, not to fight him but to hold him. Even then, even in that moment of despair. And then her body began to glow. A slow warm light that poured out from her chest and spread across her skin like something sacred was leaving. Her life essence. Joel dropped the sword. In the shadows just far enough back that the moonlight never touched him. Boone watched him and smiled. Joel fell to his knees beside her body. The glow faded. The warmth disappeared. And the truth, the real devastating truth, crawled into his chest like a blade he hadn't seen coming. He had been lied to. Every word, every accusation, every piece of evidence that had pointed to Sandra's betrayal, it had all been manufactured by the one man standing in the darkness, smiling at what he had just made Joel do. He looked up. Boone was already gone. Centuries passed. The world changed around Joel the way water changes a riverbank, slowly, constantly, without asking permission. Cities rose where forests once stood. Languages shifted. Faces came and went. Everything moved forward. Joel did not. He existed in a small apartment at the edge of a city that never slept, surrounded by the kind of silence that only comes when a person has stopped expecting anything good from the world. No photographs on the walls. No warmth in the rooms. Just a man who had lived too long sitting in the dark, carrying a weight that never got lighter. He didn't sleep well. He hadn't slept well in centuries. Every time he closed his eyes he saw her, Sandra's face in those final seconds, her fingers wrapped around his wrist. He had tried everything to die. Every method, every ritual, every reckless act. Nothing worked. The immortality bound itself to him like punishment. Like the universe itself had decided that what he did deserved to be felt forever. And then one night he found the letter. It had been slipped under his door. No envelope, no name, just a single folded page with 3 words written in ink so old it had turned rust brown. She survived. Joel read it 4 times before his hand stopped shaking. He couldn't believe what he had read.
Welcome back to Moon Soul Stories, where love, betrayal, destiny, and dark secrets collide. Have you ever been manipulated into hurting someone you truly care about? I want to hear your answers in the comment section. Subscribe to our channel, like the story, and stay to the end because Joel's greatest regret is about to return from the dead. Now, let's go back to the story.
Joel found Bella the second eyes 3 days later. She lived at the edge of the oldest part of the city, the kind of place that made people cross the street without knowing why. Joel had known about Bella for decades, a seer, a keeper of things that shouldn't be kept, a woman who saw timelines the way most people see weather. She opened the door before he knocked. I was wondering when you'd come, she asked. She was old. Slowly she stepped aside and let him in. The inside of her home was dense with silence. Shelves lined every wall, filled with objects Joel didn't have names for. She sat across from him at a low table and folded her hands. Her soul survived, Bella said. When you killed her body, her life essence didn't disappear. It scattered. And souls like hers don't scatter easily. They reform by finding a new body. A new life. Joel leaned forward. Where is she? Well, she is here with us now. In this present time. Bella's eyes were steady. She owns a coffee shop 3 kilometers from where you're sitting. She has no memory of you. No memory of what she was before. She is living a completely normal life. And Boone? He asked. Bella's expression shifted. Just slightly. But enough. Already very close to her, she said. He found her before you did. He always does. That is the nature of the curse. It pulls all of you back together, over and over, until the cycle completes. Joel stood up. Then I need to get to her. Sit down, Joel. Bella commanded. He sat. Bella leaned forward. You need to understand what you are walking into before you take another step. This is not a rescue. This is not a reunion. What binds you and Sandra is not love alone. It is a curse that has been feeding on both of you for centuries. Every lifetime she is reborn into, Boone finds her. Every time Boone finds her, the ritual gets closer to completion. And every single time, she paused, the cycle ends the same way. The room felt colder. Some curses, Bella said quietly, are not meant to be broken. Joel looked at her. And some are. She studied him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and placed something small and cold in his palm, a fragment of dark stone, smooth on one side and jagged on the other. If you go to her, Bella said, you must know this, if fate repeats itself again, if the cycle completes one more time, Sandra's soul will not reform. It will not scatter and rebuild. It will simply cease to exist. Permanently for forever. The weight of that settled into Joel like something final. Then I won't let the cycle repeat, he said. Bella said nothing. But the look in her eyes said everything she had chosen not to speak out loud. The coffee shop was small and warm, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat on a street that most people only found by accident. She had painted the walls herself. She had chosen every cup, every chair, every small imperfect detail with the deliberate care of someone who needed the world around her to feel safe. Most days it worked. But the nights were different. The nightmares started 2 years ago. She would wake up seeing flashes of things that made no sense. A blue moon, a stone castle, a man with a sword, her own hands reaching out to hold someone who was hurting her. She never saw the face clearly. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was nothing. Then Boone walked into her coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon and ordered an Americano and smiled at her. He drank the tea and left. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Within 2 weeks he knew her usual schedule, her favorite tea, the name of the neighbor whose dog she fed on weekends. He remembered everything she said. He asked questions that made her feel seen. He laughed at exactly the right moments. Sandra told her friend Zoe he was charming. Zoe said, he's too charming. That's the same thing. Sandra laughed it off. Despite all the warm gestures, Sandra never truly relaxed around him. The feeling you get standing at the edge of a cliff. That feeling was fear. Where your mind says you're fine but you know you aren't. She ignored it. She was good at ignoring things she couldn't explain. Joel saw her for the first time through the glass window of the coffee shop. He had told himself he would be careful, strategic, that he would observe from a distance before making any move. But the moment he turned the corner and saw her through the glass, her head bent over the counter, her hand moving quickly as she wrote something, her face carrying that same quiet focus he had memorized centuries ago. Every careful plan he had made collapsed instantly. He stood on the pavement and couldn't move. She looked different. New life, new body, new face. And yet something essential about her was exactly the same. The way she tilted her head. The way her hands moved. The specific way she pressed her lips together when she was concentrating. He walked in. Sandra looked up when the bell above the door rang. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds before she looked back down at what she was writing. Sit anywhere, she said. I'll be right with you. Joel sat at the table closest to the door. His hands were flat on the surface to keep them still. He watched her move around the counter and felt the full weight of 4 centuries pressing down on his shoulders. All the grief, all the guilt, all the desperate years of searching for a way to undo what he had done. She came to his table with a small notepad. What can I get you? He looked at her. Just coffee. She wrote it down. Started to turn away. Sandra. She stopped. Turned back slowly. Her expression filled with surprise, trying to figure out where she recognized the voice from. Do I know you? She asked. No, Joel said. Sorry. I read your name on the board outside. She glanced at the chalkboard sign by the door, then back at him. She nodded once and walked back to the counter. Joel exhaled slowly. He was almost caught. Meanwhile, Boone had seen Joel walk into the coffee shop from across the street. He had been expecting his presence. He had been expecting it for weeks, ever since he felt the shift in the air that meant Joel had found Bella. He watched through the window as Joel sat down, as Sandra took his order, as their eyes met for those 3 brief seconds. Boone smiled evilly. Then he straightened his jacket, crossed the street and walked inside. Boone. Sandra smiled when she saw him. That easy, unguarded smile she had never once given Joel in this lifetime. The usual? She asked with a bright smile from the counter. Please. He sat at the counter, positioned perfectly so he could watch Joel's table in his peripheral vision. Busy day? He asked softly from his table. Getting there, she replied, already reaching for his cup. Boone kept his voice light. Casual. That man in the corner, do you know him? Sandra glanced over her shoulder. No. First time he's come in. Boone picked up his phone, said nothing. But when Sandra turned back to the espresso machine, his eyes moved to Joel's table. She saw this cold worry expression on his face. Joel looked back at him from across the room, and looked back to his coffee. That night, Sandra woke up at 2:47 in the morning with her heart pounding and her sheets soaked through with sweat. The nightmare had been different this time. She had seen the blue moon full and bright. She had seen stone walls and torchlight and her own hands reaching out. And this time she had seen a face. Not clearly, it kept shifting, kept blurring at the edges, but she had seen dark eyes filled with something that looked like it was destroying him from the inside out. She sat up on her bed in the dark and pressed both palms flat against her face. "It's not real," she said out loud. "It's not real," she whispered. She went to the kitchen. Métis sat by the window and watched the empty street below. She thought about the man from the coffee shop, the one who had called her name. "Something feels off about him," she whispered to herself. She thought about how her body had gone very still when she heard his voice. She picked up her phone and almost texted Zoe, then put it back down. Some things she had learned were better held quietly until you understood what they were. Joel didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment and turned Bella's stone fragment over in his hand and thought about everything he needed to do and how little time he had to do it. Boone was already embedded, already trusted, already positioned exactly where he needed to be to begin pulling Sandra's perception of reality apart, thread by thread, the same way he had done it before. Joel knew the playbook because he had been the one destroyed by it the last time. First, Boone would build Sandra's trust until it felt unshakable. Then he would begin placing small doubts. And Joel would be the one who looked dangerous. He set the stone down on the table. Joel pressed his fingers against his eyes. How do I do this? How do I save her? He questioned himself. Sandra's memories were already surfacing. The nightmares, the flashes, the way her body had gone still when she heard his voice. The curse was pulling her memory back up from wherever it had been buried. And if Joel could reach her before Boone sealed her perception shut, before he finished building the version of reality where Joel was the threat and Boone was the protector, there was still a chance. 2 days later, Sandra was closing up the shop alone when she heard glass break in the alley behind the building. She grabbed her phone and went to the back door. She knew she shouldn't, but the sound had been sharp and close, and her neighbor Mrs. Snow sometimes cut through that alley on her way home from the night market. She opened the door. 3 men she had never seen before. One of them had Mrs. Snow's grocery bag in his hand. The old woman was backed against the wall, hands raised, too frightened to make a sound. Sandra stepped forward without thinking. "Hey, don't do that to an elderly woman," she yelled at them. The men turned at her. And then from the other end of the alley, someone else stepped out of the dark. It was Joel. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked directly toward the 3 men with a calm that made Sandra's skin prickle. The men looked at him once, and noticed some animal instinct from him, and then they were gone, running so fast. Sandra stood in the alley with her phone in her hand, and her breath loud in the silence. Joel helped Mrs. Snow pick up her groceries. The old woman thanked him in a shaking voice and hurried away. He turned to Sandra. "You should go back inside," he said. "Who are you?" Sandra asked curiously. Her voice was steady but her eyes weren't. Joel looked at her for a long moment. The alley was dark. The street beyond it was quiet. And Sandra stood there with her hand pressed flat against the door frame like she was deciding whether to step forward or back. "Someone who's not going to hurt you," he uttered softly. Sandra didn't move. "That's not what I asked," she said. The next morning Boone brought her iced strawberry cake from the shop down the street, her favorite flavor. He set it on the counter in front of her and leaned against the wall with that easy, familiar smile. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you didn't sleep last night." Sandra took the little spoon around the cake and munched into the cake. "There was an incident last night. Behind the building." Boone's expression moved into concern immediately. "What kind of incident?" She told him. "All of it. The men, Mrs. Snow, the stranger who appeared from the dark." Boone listened without interrupting her. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, "What did this man look like?" Sandra described Joel. Boone nodded slowly. "Sandra." He set his own cup down. "I've seen that man outside this block 3 times this week." Sandra looked up. "I didn't want to worry you," Boone said, "but I think you need to be careful around him. He is dangerous and a threat to you," Boone warned. "A threat? How?" Sandra asked, scared. "I can't explain, but he has this bad aura coming from him. Please stay away from him at all cost," he urged. "Promise?" he asked. Sandra nodded her head gently, still left in a trance of shock at Boone's words. Sandra didn't sleep that night either. She lay in her dark room staring at the ceiling, Boone's words turning slowly in her head like something she couldn't swallow and couldn't put down. 3 times this week. The words felt designed to frighten her, and they had worked. But one thing lingered in her mind: the man in the alley had not looked at her like a threat looking at its target. He had looked at her like someone who was afraid of losing her. She knew the differences in expression. She turned onto the other side of bed and closed her eyes. And the dream came the moment she did. Faster than it ever had, like it had been waiting just behind her eyelids. The blue moon. The stone walls. Her own voice saying words she couldn't fully hear. And then the face, closer this time, no longer blurred at the edges. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, a man on his knees in front of her with a sword in his hand and tears running down his face that he didn't seem to know were there. She saw his mouth move. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry," the man cried sadly. Sandra woke up gasping for air. She sat up on her bed in the dark room and pressed her fist against her sternum where the ache had settled like something permanent. The grief in that dream wasn't abstract. It wasn't the distant sadness of a nightmare that fades with morning light. She got up, went to her window and looked out at the street below. Joel was not there. She didn't know why she had looked. Boone moved carefully over the next 2 weeks. He always did. Patience was his oldest weapon. He didn't rush things, just moved in his own pace. He made sure Sandra heard about the incident 3 blocks away where a man matching Joel's description had been seen near a fight. He mentioned it casually, almost as an afterthought, the way you talk about the weather. He made sure she saw the blood on Joel's jacket 2 days later. Joel had been trying to help a man who'd collapsed on the pavement on the way to the coffee shop, but Boone had already primed the image. Sandra saw the blood first. The context came after. And once fear writes the first sentence of a story, the mind finishes it on its own. He held Sandra's hand when she seemed shaken. He showed up without being called. He said the right things in the right tone at exactly the right moments. And Sandra, who was already frightened and already confused and already sleeping badly, leaned into the comfort he was offering because that is what human beings do when the world stops making sense. Joel watched it all from the outside. It was the most precise kind of torture he had ever received. Watching history fold itself back into the same shape, crease by crease, knowing exactly where it was going and being unable to stop it without becoming the very thing Boone needed him to appear to be. He tried once. He stopped Sandra outside her building one evening, stepped into her path carefully, hands visible, voice low. "I need you to listen to me," he said calmly. "I know how I look to you right now. I know what you've been told. But the man you trust, Boone, he is not what he says he is." Sandra looked at him. Her expression was not angry. "How do you know his name?" she asked quietly. Joel opened his mouth and closed it. He can't find the words. "Stay away from me," she warned falsely, and walked inside her apartment. Joel stood on the pavement and said nothing. Because what could he say? The truth? The real truth of who he was and who she was and what had happened between them. It sounded ridiculous, giving off exactly like the story of a dangerous man trying to manipulate a woman into trusting him. But the nightmares kept coming. Sandra started keeping a notebook by her bed. She wrote down everything she remembered each morning. The images, the feelings, the fragments of words. She filled 6 pages in 10 days. She read them back to herself one night and sat very still with the notebook open in her lap. The man with the sword was always crying. The man in the shadows was always smiling. She had never once, in any dream, felt afraid of the man with the sword. She was afraid of the other one. She closed the notebook and sat with it for a long time. Boone made his move on a Thursday evening. He had been waiting for the right moment. The moment Sandra was tired enough, shaken enough, trusting enough. He sat across from her in the coffee shop after closing, the chairs up on the tables around them, the lights low. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was gentle, regretful. Sandra looked at him with soft gaze. "The man who keeps appearing around you," Boone said. "Joel." He let the name sit there. "Ask him how you died." The air in the room changed. Sandra's face went very still. "What did you just say?" "I know it sounds impossible," Boone said. "But you've been dreaming about it, haven't you? The blue moon, the stone castle, the man with the sword." He leaned forward. "That man killed you, Sandra. But it all happened in another life. And he has come back because he is not finished." Sandra stood up so fast from her chair that it scraped the floor. Her hands were shaking. She pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at Boone and felt, for the first time, that fear. She had never once dreamed of Boone, but she felt something off about him. She found Joel the next morning. He was sitting on the steps outside his building 2 streets from hers, She had followed the address she had written in her notebook 3 days ago without fully understanding why she had written it down. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and went very still. Sandra stopped in front of him. "Tell me how I died," she said. Joel closed his eyes. When he opened them, the grief in his face was so complete, so unguarded, that Sandra felt it in her. "I killed you," he said. 400 years ago. Under a deep blue moon. He didn't look away. "I believed you had betrayed me. Someone I trusted made sure I believed it. I didn't question it. I didn't wait to investigate, and the moment it was done." His voice broke just slightly at the edge. I knew immediately. And I have been carrying that every single day since." Sandra stood in the morning light and said nothing for a long time. "The man who made you believe it," she said finally. "It was Boone?" she asked. Joel looked at her. "Yes," he answered. Sandra exhaled slowly. "He told me to ask you that," she said. "He thought it would destroy whatever was left between us." "It might still," Joel said quietly. "No," Sandra said. "Because he made one mistake." She sat down on the step beside him. "He told me your name before I ever told him it. He didn't have the luxury of patience anymore. He thought that Joel exposing how he killed her will make her hate him and run to him instead. But instead Joel had reached her with his words. The memories were surfacing faster now. He could feel the curse shifting, the timeline pulling toward its crisis point. He needed the ritual completed before Sandra's memories fully returned, before she understood what her life essence actually was and what he needed it for. He took her on a Wednesday night. Sandra was locking up the shop alone, a habit Boone had quietly encouraged over weeks. When the lights went out, by the time her phone was in her hand, it was already too late. Joel felt it. He couldn't explain how. The curse ran through him like a current, and the moment Sandra was taken, Bella had warned him this moment was coming. She had told him what Boone needed Sandra for her life essence, the same one that had scattered at her death 4 centuries ago and rebuilt itself in a new body, was the final component of a ritual Boone had been constructing across multiple lifetimes. Ultimate immortality, the kind that didn't bend to curses or time or consequence. And the ritual required Sandra to die. Again. Joel found them in the basement of a building so old it didn't appear on any map, the kind of place Boone had probably owned for 200 years. The room was lit with a cold blue light that had no visible source. Sandra was conscious, standing at the center of a circle carved into the stone floor, her arms held by 2 men Joel didn't recognize. Boone stood at the edge of the circle. He looked genuinely pleased to see Joel. "Right on time," he said. "As always." The room looked exactly like the memory Joel had been running from for 4 centuries. Same cold light, same stone, same positioning. The only thing missing was the moon. But through a crack in the ceiling Joel could see it. Full, blue and shining. The curse had arranged everything. "Kill her again," Boone said simply. "You know how this ends. You've always known. The curse doesn't give you a choice, it gives you the illusion of one. Kill her and at least she dies quickly. Fight it, and the ritual takes longer and she suffers more." Joel stood at the entrance of the room. Sandra looked at him across the circle. "Joel," she called. "Don't." He looked at her for a long moment. Bella had said the curse was attached to him, and not to Sandra but to him. Joel reached into his jacket and pulled out the stone fragment Bella had given him. He looked at Boone. "You built this ritual around me, around my guilt, around my willingness to believe the worst of the person I loved most." He turned the stone over once in his palm. "You needed me to keep making the same choice. Because every time I did, the curse fed. Every time I killed her, you got stronger." Boone's smile didn't move. "And yet here you are, making the same choice. Because you don't have another one." "I do," Joel said. And he drove the stone into his own chest. The moment the stone made contact, the ritual circle cracked. The cold blue light convulsed. Boone staggered, not from any physical blow but from something being pulled out of him, the way a root is pulled from soil violently and completely. The immortality he had spent centuries constructing, built on the foundation of Joel's repeated guilt and Sandra's repeated death, collapsed from its base. Boone looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He had not shaken in 300 years. "No." He took a step forward. "No. This is not." But it was already done. The curse, severed from its source, turned inward. The immortality Boone had consumed across centuries began consuming him in return. All of it, all at once, with the same force he had used to take it. He collapsed to the ground. And the last thing that crossed his face was not rage. It was terror. The terror of a man who had spent his entire existence avoiding death. finally meeting it with no preparation and no power left to refuse it. He died mortal. Joel fell to the floor. Sandra caught him. Both of them went down to the stone floor together, and she held him the way she had held him in the moment of her own death 4 centuries ago. You didn't have to do that, she said. Her voice was breaking. Yes, I did, Joel said. His voice was very quiet. I owed you a life. I gave you mine. Joel, the nightmares will stop now, he said. Bella told me, when the curse breaks, everything it builds breaks with it. The memories, the cycles, all of it. He looked up at her. You'll have your peaceful life back. Sandra held him tighter. The tears running down her face were silent. And you, she whispered. Joel smiled. It was the first real smile he had worn in the past 400 years he lived. It looked like relief. I'll be okay, he said. He closed his eyes. The curse dissolved like smoke. The stone floor stopped humming. The blue moon outside faded slowly back to white. And the world, which had been holding its breath across centuries of repeating tragedy, finally exhaled. Months later, Sandra's coffee shop was warm and full on a Thursday afternoon. She had repainted the walls since everything happened. A lighter color, something that felt like starting over. The nightmares had stopped the same night Joel died, exactly as he had promised. She was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door rang. She looked up. A man stood in the entrance, slightly uncertain, the look of someone who had wandered in on impulse and wasn't entirely sure why. He smiled awkwardly and stepped inside. Sorry, is this a bad time? He looked around at the shop. I'm not sure why, but I walked past this place 3 times and kept feeling like I was supposed to come in. Sandra set down her cloth. Her hands were perfectly still. Have we met before? He asked. Sandra looked at him for a long moment, at the face she had last held in her arms on a cold stone floor, now standing in her doorway with no memory of her. She felt the tears flow from her eyes. She walked around the counter and hugged him. Joel stood very still for a moment, surprised. Then slowly, his arms came up and held her back. He didn't know why it felt like the most natural thing in the world.
Moral lesson: never let manipulation, jealousy, or lies destroy the people you truly love. Sometimes, the biggest regret in life comes from believing the wrong person instead of trusting the heart of someone who genuinely cared about you. If you were Joe, would you forgive yourself after discovering the truth? Thank you for staying to the end of the story, and don't forget to subscribe to Moon Soul Story, turn on the notification bell, like and share the story with your loved ones or someone who just loves emotional supernatural dramas. I will see you in the next story.